This video pretty much shows you how to patch your drywall. And prior to patching any wall, preparing up the surface is really important. This entails making sure that the surface to be repaired is clean and smooth, and trim away any frayed drywall edges from the hole. So I've pretty much used an 80 grit sandpaper for heavy sanding, to help remove scratches and imperfections on the wall. But I've taken my time when using the 80 grit sandpaper because it's a low grit sandpaper. It may show noticeable scratches or swells on the wall, okay? So I've used it to pretty much smooth in the surface, when sanding, because any imperfections not addressed before the patching and painting process will be visible after. And so whilst sanding, I've ensured that I've utilized, my face mask, because the process of sanding involves the removal of material, it creates airborne dust that may be carcinogenic. As you can see, I ensured that I utilized my dust mask whilst, sanding, the wall. And as you can see, it looks clean and smooth, and I've pretty much trimmed away any frayed drywall edges, from the hole. The next step would be to utilize the potting knife or the scraper to apply a ready to use filler. This can be used on walls and ceilings. It's easier to apply, easy to sand. There's no need to spot prime, and it will not flash or green, okay? And in terms of the preparation, this can be used on gypsum, plaster boards, drywall lining, old painted surfaces, cement, concrete, cellular concrete, bridge blocks, bricks, stone and primed wood, okay? So firstly, I'm pretty much ensuring that the base substrate is hard, cohesive, clean, sound and dry. There's pretty much no need to prime or seal the surface before application. I'm also pretty much ensuring that it's smooth, really smooth around the edges, and addressing any imperfections, prior to patching and the painting process, because I don't want it to be visible, once I've painted. So you can apply the ready-to-use filler with a coating blade, a trowel, scraper or potting knife. So as put a sizable chunk onto the scraper. The ready-to-use filler fills up to 1 centimeter deep. It's got an unlimited working time, and so pretty much it can be painted on 12 to 24 hours after application. And in terms of versatility, it can be overcoated with any type of filler, paint or wall coating. And pretty much after use, the product residue can be rubbed off, tools when dry. So water cleaning, off your tools or your scraper is not necessary. Capacity is 1 kg. You only need a thin film, so just make sure that you spread it out, evenly. Otherwise, if you put too much filler on, it's going to increase the amount of time you spend sanding the dried out filler down. So I'll be touching other areas with the filler, other areas that I would want to patch. So I'll pretty much spread the filler compound using the scraper. Hold the scraper at a 45-degree angle to the surface, and pull the filler compound over, the area I'd wanna patch over. So basically, whilst applying, the filler compound, I try as much as possible to leave smooth edges on the outside rim, of the compound, as it will enable it to be a lot more easier to sand later. So I'll pretty much ensure that I have got an even spread, then come back later to sandpaper. And whilst that's drying up, I might as well fill up them 3 holes that were misdrilled. You can use a mesh, but I haven't used the mesh here. If you're using a mesh, to apply the filler, just make sure that you take care of the grid lines that would appear over them whole surfaces. But I'm pretty much spreading ready to use filler over them 3 holes and other subsequent holes, and pretty much repeating the same process as before, applying a smooth layer, spreading enough compound to adequately cover them 3 holes. If you've got a mesh, apply enough compound to cover the mesh reinforcement tape and fill in the void of the hole behind the tape, okay? And if I were using a mesh, I would taper the joint compound past the edge of the mesh reinforcement by 2 to 3 inches. And pretty much, like I said previously, try to leave smooth edges on the outside rim of the compound, as it will be a lot more easier to sand much more later. If you're using a mesh, just make sure that the grid lines are not showing. If that's showing, repeat the filling process, up until the lines do not show. Just keep spreading the filler over the mesh. But if you're not using the mesh, it's practically the same thing. Spread the filler over them holes. If the circumference of them holes or perimeter of them holes keeps showing over the wall, spread more filler over and smoothing out the edges. The filler is quite soft, and comes off relatively easily. So don't be worried about that. Just ensure that you're getting enough spread and you're smoothing out the edges. Okay. Ensure that you're not applying a very thick film, as you will be sanding later. You don't want to exert a lot of energy when sanding, so don't exhaust yourself. Just apply a thin film and you should be done in no time. Okay. The next step would be to patch the plaster wall in the bathroom. When you take, your bath, steam sometimes, soaks into the paint, regardless of if you're using an extractor in the bathroom. This happens over a protracted period of time. So I've pretty much scraped out, the flaky paint, and, sandpaper the edges, the trim edges down till it becomes smooth, so that that's not apparent when I paint over. Make sure that you're not mixing up, the wood filler for wall applications and the wall filler for wood applications. In this case, I wouldn't be needing any of them fillers. Okay, so it's just a question of removing the flaky paint. The wall's been primed and before, so I don't need to prime it up, and just smoothing out the edges. Give it, and sandpaper down, the flaky bits to give it more adhesion. Sandpapering, over, the trim edges, and the flaky paint that's been removed, would provide adhesion for, the subsequent paint that will be applied, onto the roof. I necessarily wouldn't need to use the ready to fill filler or putty, onto the roofing. So I'm pretty much using the 80 grit sandpaper to smoothen out the trim edges, and to sandpaper down the areas where I've taken up the flaky paint off. So I would be using the 180 grit sandpaper to to smoothen out areas on the wall where I've used the ready to use filler, where I've applied the filler onto. The 180 grit sandpaper, produces ultra smooth surface finishes. Okay, so it's pretty much a fine grit sandpaper, but just make sure that you're putting on your dust mask. I can't overemphasize why this is necessary. You don't want to be inhaling airborne pollens that are carcinogenic. Pretty much causes cancer. Okay. If you have not visually inspected, the products that you're using to ascertain if they're carcinogenic, then as a precautionary measure or best practice, it's always advisable that you utilize your dust mask. Okay, so as a precautionary measure. So it's been pretty much over 12 to 24 hours. So I will get the 180 grit sandpaper and start sandpapering the edges and the actual area where I have patched. Okay. I'm pretty much gonna run the sandpaper, over, multiple patched areas, where I've run the ready to use filler over. So I just sandpaper the edges, make sure it's smooth. Keep checking with my hand, to on my palms to make sure that what I've sandpapered down is smooth. Okay. It's absolutely crucial that this is as flush as possible, so that when you paint over, the grid lines, or the protruding lines around the perimeter of where you've patched isn't evident when you paint over them fillers. Okay. If you're drilling through the wall, you could use an envelope, but in this case, I'm sandpapering down, so I just probably get a dustpan so that the bits and chunks of the filler, the dried filler, doesn't fall onto the carpet in the room. So just collect it nice and clean. My cleaning process doesn't need to be rigorous after sandpapering. So one way to avoid misdrilling, on walls and, to prevent you from having to patch your walls in the first place, it's not just enough to use a stud finder. It's also advisable to double check, the studs, with a pipe and cable detector. And that's because you've got metal plates that cover up cables, in the studs, behind the wall. So your stud finder may detect a 1.5 inch, stud behind the wall, but subsequently, it may have been covered, with a metal plate. Suffice to say, a metal plate might be covering, live cables in the stud. So you want a metal and pipe and cable detector to detect that before drilling the wall, okay? If you want to see how to use the pipe and cable detector as well as, the stud finder, click on the link in the description below. So prior to painting over the dried, ready to use filler, I've used a microfiber cloth to wipe and remove any dust left from sanding, okay? It's also important, to let the wall dry after cleaning if any amount of water is used. Otherwise, you may find the moisture may get trapped by the paint and cause bubbling or other problems later. So once the surface is clean and dry, you're ready to repaint or recover the original surface to match the rest of the wall. You shouldn't really worry about, paint matching as long as, you're using, the leftovers from the original paint with which you used to paint the wall. But if you haven't got the original paint, you should be able to get, the same texture or mixture of the paint from your local decorating center. You might have rings around, the patched up paint, but not to worry. As soon as it dries off, it should blend in perfectly as the original paint. The only time where you might have issues with the paint not blending, is when, the original paint, on the wall was painted, a couple of years ago or many, many months ago. But even at that, as long as you're using the same original paint, chances are that, over a protracted period of time, the paint will blend through. So I'm pretty much going to repeat the same process for the other patched areas that I've got them fillers, sandpaper into them envelopes, then subsequently, double coat or triple coat, the paint over the patched up areas to achieve, a fine and seamless blend. You can use your hand brush, if you want, to paint over. And if you haven't got a hand brush, better still, you can use your roller to give it more of a professional finish, okay, or a nice blend finish. And this is the easy part of the process, but just make sure that you're not spilling paint all over, areas where you do not want paint to get onto. So make sure that, prior to painting over the filled up holes, that you appropriately mask off, the areas that you don't want paint to get onto. Okay. So I'm just going to use like a roller brush, to get, that perfect finish, because I want it to be seamless. I want it to blend. I don't want it to be conspicuous. I don't want anyone walking in and thinking, oh, something happened there. So that's why I'm using, the roller brush with the original paint that was mixed, from the decorating center. The decorating center should be able to retrieve your paint mixture from the logbook or from their computer. And as you can see, the patch is smooth. There is no bump. The grid lines or the ring around the hole isn't evident. So I'm pretty much happy with the patch. You can't tell that there was a hole there before. And here you can see on the other patch that the damaged wall is now uniform. It's no longer evident that we've got a hole there. So I'm happy with that. And that's about it really. If you found the information useful, don't forget to subscribe, like and share, helps the channel grow. And hopefully catch up with you later. Goodbye.